Hello everyone, and welcome to section 2 called OSINT Introduction. Here we are starting our open source intelligence journey together. As the section name suggests, this is the introductional section where we will start with the theory part of the course. We have to build an excellent theoretical foundation to proceed with the hands-on agenda. First, we will do a demystification of the term OSINT that includes different definitions and approaches to understanding open source intelligence. Here I will mention who uses OSINT and where. We will cover the main types of OSINT and how they are applied to real life. We will also talk about the ethical side of OSINT because many questions can and probably will show up while conducting your OSINT investigations. My advice is always to consult yourself with a lawyer or a legal team and to protect yourself or your company with a contract when conducting cybersecurity activities in general for customers. In a video after demystification called the OSINT Cycle Overview, we will cover the OSINT steps that each investigation is consisted of. And for the last lesson, we will go through the OSINT threats and some countermeasures that you can act to improve your company's or your personal cyber posture. Let's start demystifying open source intelligence with a simple definition. It goes: open source intelligence, or OSINT, is any intelligence produced from publicly available information collected, exploited, and disseminated in a timely manner to an appropriate audience to address a specific intelligence requirement. Immediately inside this definition, I would like to further explain the words open source, intelligence, and disseminated. When you hear about open source, a lot of people immediately think about free service, free software, or data. Open source in the context of open source intelligence does not in any way relate to open source software. Rather, open source means the type of data and information that is acquired from public sources. They could be anything from television and print newspapers to blogs and websites, social media, research papers, business and sales documents, and anything you can find online or offline. We will focus on the online or the internet side of data gathering. The term intelligence has evolved over the years, from military intelligence over business intelligence to cyber intelligence. They are all wrapped around information that is relevant for some decision making. And disseminated, when I encountered this word, I was not aware of its meaning since English language is not my first language. But it basically means reporting, to spread relevant information you found and put it in the context for your customer or a client on which he or her can make an informed decision. Besides that, OSINT is a continuous process of gathering, processing, analyzing, sharing, and getting feedback about some subject. Now, I would like to share a cool fact that is relevant to open source intelligence investigations. Over 70% of pen testing work goes out to the reconnaissance and the OSINT phase. As you are maybe aware, pen testing, or penetration testing for a longer title, is a task when a cybersecurity expert or a pen tester attempts to find and actively exploit a vulnerability in a computer system. You can say it is an authorized simulated cyber attack on some company or an organization's IT system to evaluate the security of the system. This task requires a proper preparation with the reconnaissance phase and the open source intelligence tools and techniques that are the go-to methods for penetration testers. The answer to a question who uses OSINT is quite wide, and I will tell you in a moment why is that, but I would narrow it down to 6 or 7 groups of people and businesses. First, I would mention IT people, because I'm essentially an IT guy. I put hackers in the parentheses here because they are also IT people, only their end results are not good for anyone. The main thing here is that you are aware that all that data and information that you can gather and use to protect yourself or your organization, the bad guys can also acquire them. Hackers do their homework when picking a target, often relying on information left publicly exposed to make decisions about how to attack. Whether an OSINT researcher is a hacker looking for vulnerabilities to exploit or an analyst assessing exposure, their core task is to combine public data into an intimate understanding of a business target. Next is military, whose decision-making is mostly based on intelligence, and here is also the open source intelligence model. Just check out any military or an agency site and look for open source intelligence in there. They all have similar definitions, what open source intelligence is. After military, I have to mention law enforcement and private investigators whose work depends a lot on good intelligence, and in our case, that is open source intelligence. Then I have to mention companies and their employees. It doesn't matter if we are talking about the marketing, sales, or human resources, they all use different open source intelligence techniques to acquire information on which they will do their decision making. Most of the time, they aren't even aware that they are using OSINT in the first place. Also, there are parents and teachers. I personally encourage them to use open source intelligence knowledge to guide them about social media and networks in which their children are potentially involved in. And lastly, I would say that every person who uses a search engine is doing some kind of OSINT. I will give you an example. You are planning your summer holidays vacation and you are looking a good place to stay somewhere. Well, you will probably go to Google and look for that place. Check its reviews, maybe also check different sources to see are the stories and reviews about the place aligned with each other. All that searching and gathering of relevant information from the internet is an OSINT technique. Simple as that. What are the types of OSINT? I would list two main types, but also another two that are involved in this type of engaging the target: offensive, defensive, active, and passive approach to open source intelligence. Offensive OSINT is just that. Someone is collecting and using all that available data and information about you or your organization to do you harm, just as planning to conduct a cyber attack based on some learned information. I will give you a simple example. Just as a side note, I realize that people who are using or planning to use these OSINT techniques and methods for malicious purposes will attend to this course as well. We can now have a debate, is this a good or a bad approach to learn OSINT? But my opinion is if someone wishes to do harm, he or she will learn it anyway. But if this knowledge could be used in good purposes, and I think that is the majority, then I think it is worth it to release this knowledge to the public. But to get back to our offensive example, phishing is probably the simplest example. Let's say your target loves tennis, plays it recreationally, maybe they did some competition in the past, he or she really enjoys tennis, and they receive a very well formulated email that contains an invite to a tennis event that the target wanted to visit. That invite is of course an attachment. The target will probably click on it and by that execute whatever malicious purpose the attack had, just like a ransomware. To sum up, the offensive open source intelligence gives the bad guys a good starting point to prepare their cyber attack. Back to our types of OSINT. The defensive OSINT gives you a good possibility to learn anything that could be used by the bad guys. Here you can also learn what is exposed out there, because your worry isn't just the hackers. Back to our types of OSINT. The defensive OSINT gives you a good possibility to learn anything that could be used by the bad guys. Here you can also learn what is exposed out there, because your worry isn't just the hackers. Maybe you have an exposed database out there which may or may not contain highly classified information, or there's an exposed device which could potentially be a backdoor into your IT system. Data leaks are just that. Usually something gets available on the internet by mistake, an unprotected server or database. The next two types which I listed here is the active and passive approach to open source intelligence. As their names suggest, active is the type of OSINT which leaves digital footprints of your investigations. A typical example would be if you are using a port scanner, but that scanning is logged by the target system and the ISP. The result of an active approach are more accurate than the passive one, but the price is visibility. Or better to say, lack of invisibility while conducting that kind of investigation. Concerning the passive approach, I always remember the Kali Linux operating system motto: the quieter you become, the more you are able to hear. and that is probably an axiom regarding cybersecurity. Allow me to give you an example. A simple search engine activity is pretty quiet. Allow me to give you an example. A simple search engine usage is pretty quiet if you wish to enumerate the IT system exposure of the target. You may also do that with a third service like Shodan or Census. We can freely say that they are a goldmine services that we will cover later in the course. Now I would just like to make you aware of the cyber kill chain that was developed by Lockheed Martin. Since open source intelligence is used in almost every cyber process, I think that this developed kill chain makes a good view and understanding of the full cyber picture. The cyber kill chain is created to help organizations develop and improve their defense in-depth strategies to fight advanced persistent threats. There are 7 main steps through which a cyber criminal must go through to execute a cyber attack. The first step is reconnaissance, which includes open source intelligence activities. This is just like in the previously mentioned pen testing process. This involves learning about the target by harvesting email addresses, gathering information, using different OSINT techniques and methods. The second step is called weaponization, and as its name suggests, this is coupling exploitation of vulnerabilities with remote access malware into a deliverable payload. Then the stage of delivery comes to play, where the previously mentioned weapons are sent to the target via the web, email, USB, or by some other social engineering tactic. After delivery comes the stage of exploitation, where the delivered goods, actually malicious payload, use the discovered vulnerability to execute code on a victim's system. The fifth stage is installation, where installing remote access malware on the target asset is being done. Here we can talk about a victim's workstation or a server or some other device. In the sixth stage, called command and control, this is the stage where, for an example, an outside server is communicating with the deployed weapons inside the target's network and by that providing a continuous access to the system. And finally, actions on objectives. This is the last stage where the original objective is being achieved. That last stage can include exfiltration or destruction of data, or intrusion of another target. I recommend checking this cyber kill chain in more detail, because with a better understanding of this methodology, you will gain a better insight into how OSINT and its related cyber topics can and are used in the real world. Now we come to the question or statement, or whatever you want to call it, ethics behind OSINT. A question of ethics in the context of open source intelligence has the potential to become a really long debate. And that is without the legal side that is even more important with the questions. Uh, like, is my OSINT work even legal and can I get in trouble for doing this? Well, I can only give you advice how to proceed with this topic. As I have said before, and probably will repeat this in the later lessons, always consult a lawyer or a legal team when conducting this kind of investigations, because you can get logged and maybe get yourself digitally in the wrong place, but all that can happen at a good time to be blamed for something that you wasn't even aware that could happen. I put a picture of a shady alley where two persons meet, and I think that to some extent this represents the modus operandi of some OSINT techniques. I can give you a good example. While you do your OSINT investigation for some company or a customer, you encounter an exposed database which is clearly classified as secret and confidential. Probably that kind of finding is not just a question of ethics, will you use it? It can become a legal question with which you can get in some serious trouble. What will you do? Will you immediately notify the database owner to make them aware that they have a data leak like this, but in a discreet way, or will you use it to some advantage? Well, the answer here is more than evident if you're a good guy. Again, please be careful while conducting your open source intelligence investigations. If you got a feeling you are doing something you weren't supposed to do, or simply have a bad feeling about something, then that is probably true. Always consult yourself with a legal team to be sure. And now in the next video we will cover the open source intelligence cycle, where you will get a greater insight how the whole OSINT investigation looks like. So see you in the next video.